Well, we're in the fourth and final part of the series, Crazy Love. And throughout this entire series, we've been looking at, some very specific actions that will help all of our marriages to thrive. And before we jump into this fourth and final action, I just want, all of you parents to know that there's going to be a couple parts of this message towards the end that are, PG-13. So you know your kids, you know what you want them to hear, not want them to hear. And oh, by the way, if you're at one of our physical campuses, we have incredible Kids Rock environments where we teach kids at their age level. So maybe just get them checked in. If not, we gave you the warning. Now, think about this all too common scenario. Boy meets girl, girl meets boy. Something connects them together. They look at each other in the eyes. They have a conversation and their heart starts to beat together and they will start to get to know each other. And over a period of time, they will get to know each other more and they start dating each other. And then all of a sudden, love is in the air. It descends from the sky above. And there's just no one like him. There's no one like her. And all of a sudden that love starts to grow and they say things like, no one understands me like. No one really gets me like. No one knows my deepest and darkest parts of me except for, right? And then one day, he gets down on the knee and she says yes. And they get married and love is in the air. Then they buy a house together. But they do it together. But houses take work and time and intentionality. But they're together and they're young and in love. And then one day he brings home a dog. Or maybe he brings home 2 dogs. And they're in love and now they have dogs in a house. But dogs take time and work and intentionality. And one day, they have a child together. But a baby is a lot more work than a dog or 2 dogs as the dogs get relegated out to the backyard. And you got to change babies' diapers and you got to feed them and you don't get a whole lot of sleep. And husband and wife think to themselves, one day we'll get a full night's sleep again. One day we'll regain some of our time. And then the baby starts to grow, and next thing you know, there's kid number 2, and maybe kid number 3, or maybe more. And husband and wife, now, their entire life is about, driving kids around town and going to ball practices and games and coaching and fundraisers and musical practices and musicals and plays. And next thing they know it, they're just a glorified Uber driver, driving kids and friends to every party and every activity you can imagine. And the kids get bigger. And all of a sudden one day, husband and one day wife think to themselves, we fell in love, but now I think we have fallen out of love. You see, on average, a marriage lasts 8 years. That's average. Some a little bit more, some a whole lot less. But on average, that's the length of time. And I think about that length of time. 8 years is a lot of years, isn't it? Especially when you think about husband and wife, and then all of a sudden now there's kids and a family, a house and dogs and all the school and sports and musical activities that families are all just redlined with their time and energy going to. And you think about 8 years where husband and wife, all of a sudden, they wake up one day and they look at each other. And it's not so much they fell out of love with each other. The reality is this: when you don't grow with your spouse, you grow apart. And 8 years of not growing with your spouse is a long time to wake up one day and realize you're a different person. I mean, think about you 8 years ago. Completely different person than who you are today. 8 years is a long time to also wake up and realize you are different and your spouse is different, and now you just have grown apart. And all of that is going to lead us to this fourth action that is just so critical in our marriage. And for us to get to that action, I want to step into this interaction that Jesus had with, a group of Jewish religious teachers. The label is Pharisees. And you can find this in Matthew chapter 19. And, this is what we're told. Some Pharisees came to Jesus to test him. A better way to say this is to trap him. And they asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? I mean, it was a question. I mean, this question is some 2,000 years ago. And guess what? This question still circles around within churches to this day, correct? Is it lawful? Can you spiritually, for the Jewish religious leaders, they would use this word lawfully, and that was connected back to the Jewish law. The Jewish law is, they called it the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And they're like, is it lawful? Is it legal to divorce your wife? Now, Jesus is going to answer that question. But before we get to the answer, what we all have to understand is kind of what was the background to this question? What was the question underneath the question? What were they really, really trying to get at? Yeah, they're trying to test Jesus, trap Jesus, but there's more to it. You see, what we have to understand in the Jewish culture, there was 2 major Jewish schools of thought, Hillel and Shammai. Think about this like in our modern day, we have different Christian denominations, right? We all love Jesus, but there's some differences. Or maybe another analogy is this, right? You have Catholics and Protestants. Again, we all love Jesus, but there's differences. It's the same thing between Shammai and Hillel. You see, when it came to divorce, the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai all fully understood the law. Again, the Pharisees would have had the entire Old Testament memorized. They were experts of the Jewish scriptures, the Old Testament. And they all fully understood that divorce connected to, Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1, where Moses said you could give a certificate of divorce if something indecent happened. Now, we also have to understand this. This is only one way. It was only a man who could divorce a wife. A woman, could not divorce her husband. That was never accepted. So this is a one-way action. And it gets connected to, again, Deuteronomy chapter 24. Now, this is where these 2 schools of thought significantly separated. For the school of Shammai, they connected their understanding to what Moses said, to the word indecent. And they said divorce was only allowed for gross indecency. Adultery was one of those. That's the only reason for divorce. But the school of Hillel anchored their understanding to the word something. And they said, a man could divorce his wife, remember, only one way. A man could divorce his wife, for anything, all kinds of real or imagined offenses. Like 2 very practical interpretations of that is, if your wife cooked you something that was offensive, that you didn't like. I'm not joking. This was real. This is how the school of Hillel interpreted it. If your wife cooked something, and if your wife cooked fried chicken and it was undercooked, you could divorce her. Another interpretation was, if you just stopped liking how your wife looked and you had an eye for someone else, it was offensive, you could divorce her. And this was in the background of the question. And they're trying to test and trap Jesus. What say you, Jesus? And this is how Jesus responded. He goes, haven't you read? You could feel the sarcasm kind of dripping off of Jesus' lips. You could sense the right hook coming from Jesus. Like, haven't you read? Hey, you're the Pharisees. You're the religious experts. You have the law memorized. You're the experts. Haven't you read? And they would have been kind of going, okay, where's he going? Where is he going? Where's he going? What's he going to say next? And Jesus said, he goes, that at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female. And they had been like, where's he going? We're talking about what Moses said. What Moses said in Deuteronomy chapter 24. And Jesus takes them all the way back to the book of Deuteronomy. He's like, hey, but what did the Creator, God, what did he say? What was his purpose? He created the male and female. And, said Jesus, for this reason, the Creator had intent. The Creator had purpose. The Creator set something so significant in motion. And this is almost like in the fine print, and you should know better. And you should have started there. Not in Deuteronomy, but with the Creator. Jesus goes, and for this reason, man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife. And the two will become one flesh. Now, if you've been married before or ever have been to a wedding, you've heard those words. The two becoming one flesh, which really starts to reveal this fourth and final action that we'll get to in a moment. And Jesus is like, hey, God's intent, God's purpose for man and woman coming together, the two becoming one, the two becoming one flesh. And he says, so they are no longer two, but one. It's like he's like, I'm going to just keep repeating myself because I want you to know, like, it's about the two becoming one. That was God's intent. That was God's purpose. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Jesus starts with the Creator's original intent for marriage, for man and woman, husband and wife coming together, that the two will become one. The Pharisees fired back at Jesus and they said, well, why then? Why did Moses command? And that word is command is really important. So hold on to that word command. They said, why did Moses, the lawgiver, Moses, it was Moses and Elijah, closest to God. Moses was such a big deal. He goes, why did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? Why, Jesus? Again, they wanted to test him. They wanted to trap him. And Jesus came back and said, whoa, time out. Moses permitted. You see, they had twisted the Bible to fit their narrative. They twisted the Bible to fit their structure. They twisted Moses' words to fit what they wanted it to say. And Jesus, Moses never commanded. He goes, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because, and this is the reason why, your hearts were hard. But it wasn't that way from the beginning. Now, maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, Chris, but Jesus is saying divorce, you can't get divorced, but Moses allowed it. So who's right? And does the Bible contradict itself? You have to go back and, again, understand what was going on and why Moses said what he said. Jesus got to it. It was about hard hearts. You see, what was going on early on was all of a sudden, remember, divorce was one way. It wasn't two ways. And so what was happening is husbands were moving their wives out of the house, kicking them out for whatever reason, but not giving them a divorce. And a woman some 4,000 years ago, in fact, 2,000 years ago, they had no way to work. to make money, to get food, to get shelter, to survive without the husband. It was Jesus that said, male, female, one. Jesus leveled the playing field thousands of years ago. So a husband would kick his wife out of the house, and now she was stuck. She couldn't get married because she wasn't legally divorced, and now she can't survive. And Moses was like, if you're going to do that, husbands, males, men, you have to give the certificate. It was to help protect and provide for these women that were stuck without a way of even being able to live. And this is what Jesus is getting at. It's like, it was because of you men, and this is directed right to men, your hard hearts. And then Jesus is going to clarify. And he goes, lean into this. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except, and this is the one exception that Jesus gives, except for sexual immorality, and marries another woman, commits adultery. Now, like I mentioned, we're going to get to this fourth action that is so foundational for marriage. But before we do, I want to take one very sensitive side journey. Because here's what I know for some of you, and maybe this is for you. You hear Jesus says no one can get divorced except for. Maybe you knew those words, or maybe this is the first time hearing those words. But you're in, and again, I want to be so careful with this. But you're in an abusive relationship, abusive marriage. And you hear those words, or maybe someone has used those words against you. You got to hear from me. Jesus isn't saying for you to stay in the abusive relationship. What Jesus would say to you, what I'm saying to you, is you need to separate and get to safety. And if there's kids involved, you need to separate and get to safety. And right now, if you're in that, I want you to know that we as a church will partner with you to help you separate and get to safety. And anyone that uses Jesus' words as a sledgehammer to keep you in an abusive relationship, they've completely missed the heart of God. Abuse is sin, physical abuse, verbal abuse, it's sin. And the number one thing God's saying to you and I'm saying to you is get to safety. Get your kids to safety. And then navigate what the next steps are. And you might be saying, well, Chris, but Jesus said sexual immorality is the only. What we have to realize is Jesus wasn't laying out this whole checklist. What Jesus was doing was jamming the bar up how important marriage is. The two becoming one. He wasn't sitting down to give all the nuances of what might happen in life. Let me give you an example. The Bible talks about don't get drunk, and they talk about wine. The Bible never talks about addiction to pain medication. The Bible never talks about mainlining heroin. But we would all kind of say, yeah, those addictions are bad as well, right? So, God's saying, separate and get to safety. I'm telling you, separate and get to safety. Then, with wise leadership around you, wise spiritual leadership around you, what's the next step from there? Okay. I think about what Jesus said, the two becoming one. And the one word that I think embodies the two becoming one is this word, intimacy. In fact, maybe you've heard it said this way, into me see. And that's such a great kind of phrase that really reveals the heart, the idea behind intimacy. You see, in fact, our fourth action is to share intimacy. That intimacy is something that you share between husband and wife. Intimacy is something that you not only give, but you receive. And you think about sharing intimacy, and then you think about all of our actions to seek God and to serve selflessly and to set guardrails, and now we're sharing intimacy. Guardrails around our intimacy is so important. And to share intimacy is really about selfless serving. And oh, by the way, seeking God is all about understanding God's heart and how we share that with each other. See, we think back to this image here. And this happens over and over and over and again. I mean, it's a warning, a danger sign for all marriages and marriages that have kids. Is before you know it, the kids are actually separating what God has joined together. And there's one just small tweak to this image that will change everything in your marriage. It's That's the biblical image of family. The husband and wife, the two are one. Let no one separate, including kids. Your kids can't come between husband and wife. And it's so easy to do in the pace of life, in all of the obligations and sports and practices and all of that, right? All of a sudden, before you know it, your kids are 10, 12, 18, and you look at your husband, you look at your wife, and you don't know each other. Why? Because for 8 years, 12 years, 20 years, your focus has been on your kids, not with each other. My encouragement, no matter the age of your kids, the number one most important relationship, other than your relationship with God, is your relationship with your spouse. And what real love looks like for your kids is for them to see you, husband and wife, mom and dad, loving each other, intimacy at that level. The greatest gift you can give your kids is loving your husband, loving your wife at that level. I'm telling you, the greatest gift you can give your kids. Now, when it comes to intimacy, there's 4 very specific areas that I just want to spend a few moments talking about. Now, there's more, there's different lists, but these are the 4 major areas when it comes to intimacy. And I just want to give you a few thoughts. Now, these aren't all the thoughts. I could spend hours on these thoughts. There's so much more to this. I just want to stir the conversation with you and your husband or wife, or maybe when you're dating, you should be having some of these conversations, right? As you're getting to know each other, right? Remember, intimacy is intimacy. And so I just want to stir the conversation. I just want to get the conversation going. I just want to surface maybe some insights and perspectives that will help you. And maybe you have different things on this list. That's great. But it will allow you to have the conversation together. And the conversation together is everything. So when it comes to spiritual intimacy, I can't encourage you enough as husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend, to pray together and serve together. Prayer is such an intimate conversation between you and your Heavenly Father and with you and your spouse. So pray together. And again, maybe you've never prayed together, or maybe a few weeks ago when I encouraged you all to pray together, maybe you did that day, but you haven't since. Start praying together. Spiritually, have a conversation with your Heavenly Father, with God the Father, with your spouse, with the person you're dating. And serve. Find a way to serve God. Remember, it's seek first God's kingdom. That's His purpose, what God is doing. So how are you going to serve together? Husband and wife. Figure that out together. And, oh, by the way, make church a priority. Worship with your spouse. It's so easy. It's so easy. Sunday morning, you're tired. You had a packed weekend. You have a packed week coming up. And last week was packed. And before you know it, you haven't missed 1 week of church. You have missed weeks and now months of church. Your kids need to see you coming to church together, husband and wife. And they need to see you making it a priority to worship together, to sit together. It's so critical. Spiritually, there's an intimacy. Remember, God is uniting 2 into 1. Not just physically, but spiritually. It leads to the second kind of area, and that's emotional. The 2 words I wrote down was to listen and to share. My wife will say to me, I want to fix things and help her fix things. I don't know if it's my personality or me being a guy or a combination there of both. But there's times where she'll look at me and she'll literally say, I'm not asking for you to fix this. I just want you to listen. And here's what I love about that. She's helping me understand what she needs. She's drawing me in to go, yeah, she's not asking me for wisdom or insight or how to lead through it. She just wants me to listen. And do I always receive that easily? No. But I'm working on it. And she's helping me by saying that. And so maybe that's one of those things you just need to work on listening and sharing. I'm trying to work on how to share with my wife, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. Hey, I'm really, this is something within me, and I'm trying to figure it out. I don't know. It's so uncomfortable for me to say. Why? Because I feel like I should figure myself out. I feel like I should own my struggle, my stress, my whatever. Like I should. I'm a guy, right? Like it's one of those things. And it's like, no. The two becoming one. I can't expect my wife to understand the stress in my life and what's heavy within my heart and my spirit if I don't share with her. And so I'm trying. And at first it felt so awkward, and still it feels awkward, but I'm telling you, I'm sharing, and guess what? She's listening. And one of the greatest things for my wife and I over the 26 plus years of being married is that we have consistently gone on dates together. We have made it a priority. Now, are there small little seasons that all of a sudden that rhythm gets? Yes. But I'm telling you, holistically, once a week, we have been on a date together. We've missed some, but not many. Why? Because what joined you together before you got married? Think back. Boyfriend, girlfriend, date after date after date after date, where you just listened and shared and listened and shared and listened and shared. And then all of a sudden you get married and you get the house and you get the 2 dogs and you get the kids, and all of a sudden now there's zero time for you to listen and share. You got to go on a date together. Start now. I don't care how many years you've been married. Go on a date. Make it a priority. Make it a commitment. Put it in your calendar. For Kim and I, it's Friday. Friday is that day. Hold tightly to it. Do whatever you can. Fight for it. Commit to it. And when you're on a date, share and listen. Leads to the third area is physical. And I wrote these 2 words, touch and sex. And those are the same and not the same. What do I mean by touch? There's something about just a hug. I'll ask my wife, I'll like, hey, honey, will you just scratch my back? Now, there's nothing like a good back scratch. But it's more than that. There's just something about that physical touch. Holding hands together. We'll be on vacation. We'll be walking somewhere, and all of a sudden she'll reach out and grab my hand. I'll reach out and grab her hand. There's just something about that action. And oh, by the way, parents, your kids need to see that. Even when your kids go, oh, gross, mom and dad are hugging in the kitchen again. They need to see that. And sex is a real important part of the marriage relationship. Sex is this image of the two becoming one that God designed, and it's good in the context of marriage. And if that is missing, if any of these things are missing, what the danger is that the other person is going to go try to fill that need somewhere else. And maybe you as a husband and wife just need to have a conversation about that. And all of that leads to this other word I wrote down. Word is adventure. And you might be like, how Chris, did you go from touch and sex to adventure? Well, there's there's so much to the physical side of marriage. I like doing marathons. I finally did another one last year. I have one coming up. And what I so appreciate about my wife is that she joins me in that physical adventure. Now, she doesn't run a marathon with me. That's not her thing. But we have the whole Buffalo Marathon weekend planned out together. Her and I have that weekend. We're going to go up early. We're going to go just explore kind of, upper New York and have some fun. And then on race day, she meets me at different points along the course. And I tell you, seeing her standing there, and it's seconds on the course, seeing her, so life-giving, so life-giving. But she does that adventure with me. Figure out how to have adventure together. And it leads to this last one, intellectual. There's a learning and an engagement that happens. How are you learning together? How are you engaging together? How are you having conversations with different perspectives together? How are you joining those kind of intellectual conversations and going on that journey as a couple together? And you know what that looks like for your personality and your spouse's personality. But one of the things I also wrote down was dreaming together. My wife and I have been planning for, empty nest now for over a decade, and we're already talking about retirement, which is over a decade from now. And we've been dreaming of what life looks like without kids in our house and what life looks like, retirement. And that dream is starting to come alive of we create together, and I do woodworking, and she's a creative genius, and we've done some craft shows, but we're dreaming of what life can look like as our life changes. What area do you need to work on? What area do you need to focus on? What area do you need to have a conversation with your spouse on? And have that conversation. Now, we started this journey looking at this simple triangle. And the pursuit is to seek God, His purpose, His righteousness, to serve selflessly, to have a mutual submission competition, to set guardrails, to protect yourself, to protect your marriage, to protect your family, and to share intimacy. Into me see. Protect what God has joined together, the two becoming one. Grow together, learn together, strive together, go on an adventure together, and watch what God does until death do us part. Let's pray. Lord, I just pray for every marriage, every dating relationship that might end up in marriage, that, Lord, we will strive to love each other like you love us. In your name I pray.